What is up, guys? It is time for an early live before lock. We have a 4-gamer coming up that is locking in 1 hour, and Lord knows that you guys need us to talk about this 4-game slate game by game to give you the best information possible. And I'm Chris Spags, joined by a man who's well equipped to help provide that same quality information. He's nerd-ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
Well, I'd be better equipped if we had all the starting lineups for these teams, because that is something I'm trying to figure out some of my exposures right now. And then I'm like, well, I don't know who's starting for the Yankees or the Cubs. The Cubs game being definitely really important because the wind seems to be like it's going to be blowing out in to center field at Wrigley. So definitely I'm going to be updating my lineups basically the entire time that we're doing the show.
Yeah, so a lot of fun to come up for Greg. I'm going to be giving my advice on the slate, not taking part as my body recovers from pounding ice cream like a monster, as I was telling Greg and Tyler before the show yesterday. But that's my fault, not yours. The good news for you guys that you won't be affected by my late life onset lactose intolerance. In fact, you're going to be a beneficiary of it all because today is the last day of the gold rush going on at Awesemo, where there's gold in them VAR DFS hills with the promo code Gold Rush, where you can get 25% off your first month of Awesemo Plus at awesemo.com/join. It's a great time to be a DFS player because there's all the sports going on right now. NBA playoff content is going off every single day. Obviously, we have the showdowns today and tomorrow. There are going to be major do or die games for the Eastern and Western Conference. We also have the PGA going on. PGA Championship is today. There's also some showdown tournaments for that come up this weekend. All the sports, MMA, everything is in full season right now. So go take part in that promo code Gold Rush before it goes away today. That ends at the end of the day today. So 25% off your first month of Awesemo Plus at awesemo.com/join. And also one other important promo code to note for today, especially with these playing games going on, you can get yourself an NBA Express package for $4.95 for 2 weeks. So you're getting all the showdown data that's available for these showdown slates. It's going to be the big 2 ones today and tomorrow, but also you're getting all the Express package data that we have for NBA as well, which includes the premium Slack, and that's basically player projections and grade form as well as ownership projections and grade form. So go check out that promo code PLAY-IN at awesemo.com/join. Again, $4.95. That's less than an extra value meal for yourself. You have a decent chance to get some good returns on the showdown slates, at least a decent chance of chopping with 500 other people, but still that is a decent profitability likelihood for you guys out there. So go use that promo code PLAY-IN at awesemo.com/join. And Greg, I feel like you gave your overarching observations already for this slate, but anything else you want to throw in here in terms of the pitching, in terms of the hitting, anything that you've really observed being surprising to you in terms of ownership, top stack potential, whatever the data that we look at?
No, not really. I mean, if we look on Draftkings, maybe I'm a little surprised around Draftkings and Fanduel, actually, that Rich Hill isn't picking up all that much ownership, and definitely something that we'll be getting into as we talk about it, because there's very clear chalk as pitcher today, and I definitely think Tyler Mahle and Domingo Herman are good options today, but Rich Hill, who I kind of poo-pooed on a couple weeks ago just for being old and not throwing hard and just generally sucking, but he's pitched really well ever since I said that, so he looks to me like somebody's going a little bit under-owned, I mean. So definitely as I'm making my lineups, that's something I'm keeping an eye on.
So we'll have some more that we hit on, of course, as we go game by game. So hit that like button. It helps us out a bunch here on this show. And we appreciate it very much for the MLB content in particular, as I talk about a lot on these shows. The NBA is the top dog in terms of views, in terms of engagement and all of that. But we appreciate very much you guys being here for an MLB show and taking part in a community that's really done also a hot start from what I could tell from everybody's tweets and all of that, as well as the Awesemo Hall of Fame. So please hit that like button and make sure to subscribe to the channel to check out all the content we have for every sport, including MLB all day long. First game up, we got Tampa Bay, 4.9 implied runs against Dean Kramer. And Dean Kramer, another pitcher who you could have talked yourself into earlier in the year, but so far has started to trend downwards in a major way. A 21.6% K rate for himself, 6% home run rate, in addition to giving up near perfect home run launch angle at 19.8 degrees, 93 miles per hour of exit velocity. Kramer's been getting hit pretty hard, and that is not going to get easier for him in an 83 degree day in Baltimore's Park, Greg. So Kramer, to me, one pitcher going to be 30% owned today, and that is a lofty number for a dude who might get shelled. Even if you don't believe in the Tampa Bay stack, I don't know how you can get that much ownership on Dean Kramer.
Yeah, I don't understand either side of this. I don't understand why Dean Kramer is super popular. And if Dean Kramer is super popular, why are the Rays so popular? Like, the whole thing doesn't make sense to me. We have the Rays is the most popular stack on the slate, and Dean Kramer, just wildly overowned, is just a crappy SP2. And it's not like there's some spot where you desperately need to save salary to spend up for. So to me right now, I'm way underweight to Dean Kramer. And then just by the way that I sort my offenses and build my lineups, I'm going to be underweight to the chalk stack that is the Tampa Bay Rays today. Fading the chalk offenses could not have gone worse over the last few slates, but I'm never going to be a victim of recency bias. I've been doing this for a very long time now, and these are just the ways it goes. There's up and downs, and the last handful of slates have been absolutely terrible for me in MLB DFS, but I'm never going to play a chalk offense that has this high of ownership compared to as low of odds they do of overall having a top stack. So we have this as the most negatively leveraged team by a pretty wide margin in our top stacks tool. On a 4-game slate, I still get to a little bit of the raise, but way, way less than the field has.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of raised ownership on DraftKings. We will do some money time here coming up in 25 minutes. So another reason for you guys to hit that like button. We'll give you guys the top 5 owned plays or projected owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel coming up in 25 minutes. But the raised ownership looking very lofty for the top 4. Austin Meadows and Brandon Lau in particular are going to be over 37% ownership on DraftKings. Even Francisco Mejia down the bottom of the order going to be over 30%. And the question I would have for you, Greg, is that I agree that they look wildly overowned. The top stack tool has them about 26% arrogant ownership for the stack. But it does seem like this spot against Kramer, not a great bullpen behind him either, though probably better than people realize Baltimore's bullpen is. But still, I think you have to get some Tampa Bay. I think you have to get less in the field. Like, I don't see myself wanting to get more than a third of Austin Meadows. I think capping that at, 15 to 20% still seems like the more logical move. But the question I would have for you, Greg, is are you willing to take them out entirely of the player pool? Or are you going just, having the amounts of exposure that's expected for them in the field? Or is there something you're doing here just to get less raised, but still get some exposure?
Yeah. So, like I said, I'm still building my lineups. Part of it also is because we don't have lineups for the Yankees. We don't have lineups for the Cubs. So as I'm talking, I'm also updating some of this stuff. But I think that also helps me to talk about it as I go, because it's kind of hand in hand as I'm doing it. I could kind of talk through what I'm doing. So I do have exposure to a bunch of these Rays guys as one-offs. It's just not as much exposure as the field, right? So we have Brandon Lau, 38% projected ownership on DraftKings. G-Man Choi, 27%. Austin Meadows, 37%. I'm just rarely ever going to roster any one individual hitter that much. So these guys are all in my player pool. And like I said, I have some Rays stacks, but just right now I have 7% exposure to the Rays as a stack, as a total team. The field has them 25%. So they're in there. I just don't have nearly as much of them as the field. I just have them owned even a little bit less than what I actually think these guys' odds are of being optimal, because I'm always trying to differentiate the actual projected chance of somebody being optimal compared to what their ownership is. So when somebody's that over-owned, any individual player, any one individual stack, I'm always just lowering them a little bit.
Yeah, and I think the one guy I would have some real concerns about lowering too much would be Austin Meadows, just because we have seen him have a crazy upside as a chalk play just the other day. Didn't play yesterday amidst that barrage of home runs that came mostly from Randy Arozarena, but still a guy that should grade out pretty well against Kramer. Kramer's given up more home runs to the left-hand side of the plate, a higher ISO, 215 ISO to lefties as well. Austin Meadows, I think, to me, is really onerously owned, but I still would be a guy that I think you have to get some amount of. I guess anything else about the Rays that stands out to you? I just feel like this is an important team to talk about because they're just going to grade out so well. And again, we've been burned by the chalk going off so many times that I do want to make sure that we're covering this as best we can. Is there anything else you would do here, like Kevin Kiermaier being lower owned, Yandy Diaz? Do you see these guys being useful additions here to try to get that ownership product down?
Yeah, I'm thinking about trying to up the projections on the guys at the end of the batting order, just so, hey, maybe I get Rays stacks, but it's just, hey, I have Brett Phillips, who's picking up almost no ownership. I have Yandy Diaz at 13%. You mentioned Kiermaier at 9%. Joey Wendell, 17%. He's actually the guy that I'm most overweight to right now. So if you want to stack the Rays and just be different and make it a not chalk stack, or even if you want to, let's say you really like Austin Meadows a lot as a play. Personally, I don't think that he should be 40% owned. I don't think any hitter really ever warrants 40% ownership. But with that said, let's say you really do want to include Austin Meadows in a stack. If you just go Lau, Choi, Meadows, Mejia, Rosarena, cool. You have the same lineup that 1,000 other people have today. But if you mix Austin Meadows in with guys like Joey Wendell, Kevin Kiermaier, then you have a fairly unique Rays stack.
Yeah, I think that's how I'm feeling it too, and definitely going to be a team that's highly owned, but wouldn't be shocking to see them pay it off to some extent. Obviously, maybe not the full 5-man does, but definitely a likelihood of production here going against Kramer, who has really had nothing. And at 30% ownership for Kramer, just something else to keep in mind here, that people are going to Kramer in a major way too, and that does not seem like the greatest move to have today. On the other side, Rich Hill, a guy that Greg talked about earlier, the numbers for Rich Hill have been starting to take an uptick, up to a 26.6% strikeout rate for himself so far this year, compared to 2019, a 26.1% K rate. rate, so not that far off. Swinging strike rate and chase rate have actually been a little bit better. Well, swinging strike rate's been 1% better, 10.5% swing strike rate compared to 9.5% since 2019. Chase rate's been pretty much flat, 28.8% compared to 29%. But Greg, it does seem like Rich Hill's getting strikeout results, and he's facing a team in Baltimore that I think kind of surprisingly doesn't strike out a lot against left-hand pitching. Only a 22% K rate for themselves on the year, which is lower than league average. And I have this actually confirmed lineup for today. Only two guys that strike out above league average against left-hand pitching. So maybe not as great of a matchup against Baltimore as people might think.
So here's what I like about Rich Hill, though. I mean, like you said, we've seen the strikeouts from him this year. The pitching options for this slate are overall pretty crappy on the whole. And Dean Kramer's picking up way more ownership on the other side of Rich Hill, which is very bizarre to me. So to me, I think Rich Hill is the better matchup, and he's the better pitcher. He's 41 years old. Something that's really bizarre to me that I don't really know what to make of. Rich Hill really seemed like he was on the decline last year. He had a 87.9 average fastball velocity, and he had a 5.1 expected ERA. So when Rich Hill started the season poorly, I just assumed, all right, Rich Hill over the age of 40, velocity's on the decline, whatever, that all makes sense. All of a sudden now he's pitching better and his velocity's gone up. So now his velocity, 89.3 average velocity on his fastball compared to 87.9 last year. So all of a sudden he's throwing 1.5 miles per hour harder. So I think maybe there's a little bit of reason to think that, hey, he's rediscovered something. Maybe he wasn't healthy last year. He's gotten healthier as this year's gone on. We know that Rich Hill's battled all kinds of injury issues. So if he's going to remain this low owned relative to this being a 4-game slate, I think that he's one of the best pitching options for tournament purposes.
Yeah, on paper, you're definitely going to get at the price tags on DraftKings and get a lot more Tyler Mahle popping up at $500 more. The projections, difference in projections from Awesemo, about 7 fantasy points between the two, favoring Tyler Mahle, obviously. So that is a play for Rich Hill where, yeah, if you can afford to get to him as an SP2, I think that's the move. I would still definitely want to get Mahle more, even with him being twice his own. I guess that'd be a question for you, Greg, and we're going to get to Mahle in a second, but do you consider Rich Hill to be a viable pivot to Tyler Mahle at half the ownership?
So right now I have very similar exposure to both of them as I'm rerunning my lineups, but I have Mahle's my most exposed pitcher, Rich Hill is 2, and Domingo Herman is 3. But Mahle and Hill are definitely 1-2 for me right now.
All right, the Baltimore hitter is also going to be a little bit under-owned according to the top stacks tool. And because of the fact they don't strike out a lot, and Rich Hill, I think we talked about he's a viable pitcher, but I still wouldn't mind targeting him a little bit. I don't hate the Baltimore stack. It feels like on a slate that obviously a shorter slate, not a lot of ownership going to a team that does have a decent chance of being a top stack, a 7% chance of being a top stack today. I don't mind getting a little bit of Baltimore in my life, Greg. And I feel like given your historic stance on Baltimore and short slates, you might be there too.
Yeah, so to an extent, I think there are still better options on this slate overall. And like you said, we only have them with a 7% chance of being a top stack. And for a slate that only has 4 games, that's fairly low. And like I said, I'm also pretty high on Rich Hill today. There is no one team that I'm taking out of my player pool entirely when we only have 8 teams to choose from. But Baltimore is one of the teams I have the least amount of exposure to. And more than anything, it's because I have Rich Hill as my second most rostered pitcher on the slate. And I think Rich Hill's going a little bit under-owned himself. So to me, I prefer the Rich Hill side to the Baltimore side. So the Orioles are one of the offenses I have the least amount of exposure to.
Also, no Yankees, no Cubs lineups yet, but we did get the Minnesota Twins lineup that has nothing to do with anything going on. So good job by the Twins being fastidious in a way that these other teams are not. Next game up, we got Tyler Mahle going against San Francisco, 4.2 implied runs for the Giants in this spot. And Mahle has the best strikeout stuff on the slate, a 29.5% K rate for himself. Also, the whip has been down for him to a 1.14 whip. The overall numbers for him, velocity has been up as well, 93.6 miles per hour since 2019, up to 94.4 miles per hour this season. So Tyler Mahle in this spot, going into Cincinnati's park, I think is going to be his home park is going to be tough for Tyler Mahle more often than not. But the strikeouts were so good. He's facing a Giants team that's also striking out at a 29% clip on the year against right-hand pitching. I do feel like there's some power concerns for me with the Giants, but Tyler Mahle, Greg, I think in terms of pure strikeout stuff, what we look for in fantasy, like he might give up a home run or two, but I think the strikeouts and the fact he's pitching over 5 innings per start, probably enough to get a lot of Tyler Mahle on the slate.
Yeah, this Giants offense has kind of come out of nowhere. Like all of a sudden, Buster Posey is playing up to his MVP form. I'll bring up Buster Posey's numbers. I was looking before. He already has more home runs than he hit in his last full season, which is crazy. Because keep in mind, Posey didn't even play last year. He had some concerns about overall health and safety, and then I think he had just adopted twins or something like that. It was so he just took time to be with his family, didn't bother with the shortened season. And you just kind of figured a year off for Buster Posey. He was already old. He had some injury issues. He was on the decline. you just kind of thought like, hey, future Hall of Famer, former MVP winner who's just kind of passed at this point. And all of a sudden he's one of the best catchers in baseball again. So maybe the year off rejuvenated him a little bit, but he's also not in the lineup today. But that aside, the bigger picture is just the Giants do have a better offense than would have been expected. Either way, I think Mahle is pretty clearly the top overall pitching option on the slate. But I wouldn't take the Giants out of your player pool entirely. I think they're actually a team to get a little bit overweight to the field on. They have a really positive leverage score for us. And then more than anything for me, I have Mahle, like I said, he's my most rostered pitcher. But most of my lineups that aren't Mahle lineups are actually going to be Giant stacks.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Mahle going to be highly owned today on the slate, and you can definitely get some leverage going to the Giants hitters. But I guess a question for you before we talk too much about the hitters, because I do want to get into that a little bit more. And I also think it's not, given what we know of baseball players, Buster Posey being on the wrong side of the hill, I would say, not entirely possible he adopted those twins just to eat their stem cells. I think we should probably keep that. I don't know how old they are. I presume they're having a lovely life for themselves, but sometimes you gotta correlate the facts here. That's what we do on this channel. Mahle ownership though, Greg. At what number is too high for you for Mahle, given the fact you do like the Giants as a potentially contrarian stack, you do like them as leverage? What number for Mahle seems too high to get to?
I like how we're kind of assuming Buster Posey's like the baseball version of Woody Allen, which, I mean, who knows what Woody Allen's actually doing, but, it's probably somewhere.
I don't think he's eating stem cells.
No, I mean, it's somewhere in that category, though. So the Tyler Mahle, I have him in about 60% of my lineups right now on DraftKings. I haven't finished updating my Fanduel lineups yet, and then I'm obviously going to have to do another update whenever we get the lineups for the Cubs and the Yankees. But so right now, Mahle at 60%, that has me overweight to the field. We have Tyler Mahle currently projected for 40% ownership. I think it's pretty curious that Domingo Herman is currently projected as the chalk pitcher on the slate. And it's not to say I think Herman's a bad play. He's my third most rostered pitcher, but him being an over 50% of lineups, like I think that Mahle and Rich Hill are both better options. So that's just something that's a little, but we just got the Yankees lineup. Let's see what that is. So that is something that's a little curious to me, how much exposure Domingo Herman has. He has pitched better recently. He's overall been a little bit inconsistent, has struggled with issues off the field. But does that surprise you that Mahle's picking up less ownership than Herman today?
It does. I think it's probably the price tag working a little better for people's lineups. And I think too, it's not something the ownership projections are made to, I think, encapsulate as quite as much, but I mean, we did just see Corey Kluber throw a no-hitter against Texas, so I do think that's part of the. Tyler's excited to see his team get no hit. Is that what I'm reading? That you see because it's a former Ranger doing it. Is that part of the? Okay, so our producer Tyler likes Corey Kluber, is happy that he got revenge on Tyler's current favorite team of the Rangers. But either way, Domingo Herman not going to throw a no-hitter. So I'll make this take today, and I know it's actually a kind of a ballsy one to make, given the fact that we've seen so many guys throw no-hitters. I don't see Domingo Herman throwing a no-hitter today, Greg. I don't know if you want to join me on this hill that I'm willing to die on.
I hope not, because I'm underweight to the field on him. And here's the other thing too about the no-hitter. Yesterday, kind of jokingly, somebody asked us for no-hitter picks. I was like, oh, this is kind of a funny way to close the show. And there actually was a no-hitter on the slate. So look at that. We just picked the wrong guy.
Also, it's producer Tyler pointing out it was Kluber bobblehead night in Texas last night. Can't waste the merch. So I guess that probably spurred him on there. Bobblehead night's one of the biggest correlations we know in DFS for quality performance. But I would agree with you, though. Either way, the main thing for me is Mahle. It does look like a better play. He is $1,200 more on DraftKings. So I think that price discount's probably what's leading people to get. I think a full Rays stack would be my guess about how people are pairing Herman. So trying to get some Mahle in the Rays or trying to get some Mahle and some other stack, I think would be a more appropriate move to get different from the field. But let's talk deeper about the Giants hitters, because you mentioned no Buster Posey. That lineup has been confirmed today. And we do have Mike Yastrzemski, who's hit the ball pretty well. Alex Dickerson, guys who've hit the ball pretty well against righties historically. But a lot of these guys are hitting above their heads this year, where I don't really know what to make of it, where like Brandon Crawford's had a 242 ISO over the last season, plus Darren Ruff's had a 247 ISO against both-handed pitchers over the last season. Plus, these guys' numbers are really lofty in a way where I don't see it in the splits against right-hand pitching, especially for a guy like Brandon Crawford. But how much of Crawford, Ruff, how much of these, I guess, lower sample size quantities are you trying to get, where I think we could sort of know for sure that like guys like Yastrzemski, Longoria, Dickerson, like you sort of know what they are?
Yeah, so I have this team in about 15% of my lineups as a stack now. So, like, I have Mahle a little over 60% and 15%. So, I guess I do have actually a decent chunk of lineups. It's in a Mahle or the Giants. I'm just updating this right now also because I actually have Brandon Belt and Buster Posey in my player pool, and neither of them are in the lineup today. But the focus for me would still be on some of these left-handed hitters for the Giants. Yastrzemski is really expensive, but the reason it's not an issue for me in stacks is because the rest of the lineup is so cheap. So Alex Dickerson at 3,300. We have Duger. He's at 2,800. Darren Ruff, who's kind of a boomer bust play, but he does have a favorable lineup spot, and he's only 2,700. Right-handed hitter, but he's one of the righties that I'd be targeting just because of what his price point is. So it's a team that, because of the pricing on them, it's not hard to get to.
Yeah, because of the park, because of some of the guys and their ability to hit, I think this is a good volatility spot both ways. Where Mahle striking out a lot of guys today would not be crazy. They have 6 guys that strike out over league average, 28.6% aggregate K rate again on the year versus right-hand pitching. But you do have enough pop here where I think playing both sides, as Greg is going to be doing today, seems like a pretty good move. On the other side, we have Johnny Cueto going against Cincinnati, 4.9 implied runs for Cincinnati. Cueto's strikeout rate has been down a little bit this year to 19.8%. Also seems like he's been getting a little bit luckier in terms of walks and hits, down to a 1.2 whip compared to a 1.3 whip since 2019. But the swinging strike rate for him has also been up a little bit. So I guess you could sort of say Cueto maybe does look slightly improved, but not enough for what we look at fantasy wise, Greg. I think to me on this slate, Johnny Cueto, 12% ownership. If you got any more than that, I think you're just chasing something that's not really there.
Yeah, I'm underweight to the field on Johnny Cueto. And I mean, for a 4-game slate, when somebody's only 10% owned and I'm still underweight to the field, I agree with you. There's not a whole lot to see there. And also Johnny Cueto, look at some of his numbers this year. He does have a 3.62 ERA, but a 5.02 expected ERA. So there's definitely reason to think regression is coming for Johnny Cueto. And I mean, if there's a spot where he would see regression, it's, it's pitching in a hitter's ballpark like this, even though it is one, he's familiar with. He spent a lot of his time in his career here, but either way, Johnny Cueto, not quite the pitcher he was earlier in his career. And even if you look at the last couple of years, because keep in mind this year, not all that big of a sample size, but the last few seasons for Johnny Cueto have been somebody who's quite over the hill. 5.40 ERA in 2020, 2019 a 5.06 ERA. He was serviceable in 2018 with 3.23 ERA and a 4.18 expected ERA, but then 2017 4.52 ERA, 5.13 expected ERA. So it's been a few years now where Johnny Cueto has just kind of been around a replacement level pitcher. The last time he was really any good was all the way back in 2016. So you consider somebody 35 years old. He's had some injuries at this point in his career. The velocity isn't what it once was. And I don't think we're getting a serviceable fantasy pitcher in Johnny Cueto back ever again.
Yeah, the hope for Cueto, I guess, would be that he can hang in long enough and not give up a ton of production rather, and just get some easy outs for himself because the strikeouts probably won't be there. And one thing that does concern me as well, he does have, a league average 3.1% home run rate since 2019, but this year that's been 1.8%. He's only faced 111 batters, but this is the kind of situation where I do think that home run rate can start to come up a little because you're playing in a park that does play well for power and against a team that does have some power itself. So Cueto, even if he does hang this game, he's probably going to give up a few runs. So I don't see a lot of reason to be very lofty on the field. That said, this is a Cincinnati team that has 7 guys that strike out slightly over league average, not incredibly over league average overall. So maybe there's some pathway there. The hitters for Cincinnati, Greg, does look like they are actually exactly appropriately owned according to the top stack tool at an 11.4% chance of being a top stack, 11.4% ownership expected. A lot of that's going to be going to Eugenio Suarez, and it looks like Jesse Winker as well going to be picking up a good amount. But Suarez really the chalky bat of note here, which is interesting because of that price tag. But Cincinnati is really expensive here, Greg. They are getting a price jump here like they're playing at Coors, and I guess you could argue that Cincinnati's park has played about as hot as Coors has in terms of the hitting for the most part. So I get it, but how much Cincinnati are you willing to get given the fact that these guys are like really aggressively priced?
Yeah, so this is a team that's way different on Fanduel versus Draftkings. Draftkings, I'm about even with the field, actually a little bit underweight just because of what the pricing is, like you mentioned. Fanduel, though, they are way overrun. So totally different situation where actually the Reds on Fanduel, we have them with 16% projected ownership and a 12% chance of being a top stack on the slate. So there's a few teams actually today across the two sites that I have like wildly different exposure to now that I'm updating my lineups and looking at it. And the Reds are one of them because I'm about even with the field to slightly under on the Reds on DraftKings, but I'm way under the field on the Reds right now, and a team that I'm pretty limited to just based on also them being really expensive on FanDuel. We only have with a 7.6% chance of being a top value, and then just all that ownership going to them. So they are definitely a better team to look at on DK than FanDuel, but a team that I'm underweight to the field to on both sites.
If you were to play the Reds, which hitters would you stand out to you as a priority? Because I do think Winker in the leadoff spot does have some degree of appeal. Cueto also worse historically against lefties, getting up at 211 ISO compared to a 146 ISO to right-hand hitters. But besides that, I feel like, I don't mind getting a Tyler Naquin as a slightly cheaper option as well because of that same lefty split. But I really think, you can give me any Reds and I probably wouldn't be the maddest about it in an optimizer. So I don't know if you have anybody that stands out as a priority.
So here's one issue I have. It's something I've ran into before. Maybe this is making me a little bit biased, but I've had slates where I've rostered some of these Reds guys. And I don't know if you remember in particular, there was one slate where Tyler Naquin was not picking up that much ownership. And both you and I looked at him and were like, oh, he looks like a really strong play relative to ownership. And I don't even know what day that is. I just remember us having this conversation before. So when I had him in a bunch of Red stacks that day, the Reds went and scored a bunch of runs and Naquin got pinch hit for after 2 at-bats. And that's always something I'm a little wary of with some of these teams is Naquin, if there's a lefty that comes in the game at some point, he's going to come out of the game. So that makes it a little bit harder for me to prioritize him as compared to some of the hitters that I know are at least going to be in the game through the entire time.
Yeah, that's a reasonable way to look at it too. It is a bad bullpen behind Johnny Cueto today. I have the Giants bullpen as being really probably the worst on the slate, a 4.7 xFIP for themselves, only a 22% K rate, giving up a good amount of home runs, also a 40% fly ball rate that could play pretty well here in Cincinnati's park. So I do think, to me, I don't mind this red stack in a couple different ways. And I think that note about Naquin is probably worth it. And he does seem, or worth pointing out rather, he does seem like he'll be a little lower owned than some of these other guys. So maybe a play to take on some degree of risk. I think Winker less of a pinch hit risk, though you are paying a steeper price tag for him. But the Reds, to me, a team you could pay up to be contrarian for, or mostly contrarian for some of these hitters. And we'll see how the ownership looks in about 4 minutes coming up here. Let's get into this next game because we did get the Yankees lineup. And I guess let's talk about the Yankees hitters first then, since we just got this lineup in and seems like it's worth hitting on. But the Yankees 4.1 implied runs against Dane Dunning. Dane Dunning has been actually pretty good on the year with a 26% K rate for himself, a 3.2 xFIP, giving up a little more walks and hits than you'd like to see with the 1.4 whip. But it does seem like the underlying numbers indicate that Dane Dunning's been doing a pretty solid job for himself. But the Yankees lineup today, you have LeMahieu, Voit, Judge, Urshela, Torres, Sanchez, Frazier, Andujar, and Brent Gardner, looks like. So I guess, Greg, does this lineup look any better or worse than usual for you? I feel like there's a pretty solid Yankees lineup. I don't know if people in the chat saying that Yankees lineup is so I don't really know if I'm missing something here.
I mean, maybe because you just look at the lineup and it's like, hey, there's no Stanton in it or something like that because, Stanton's on the injured list. So certainly, it's not a full powered Yankee offense.
I also read the wrong lineup, by the way. I read the projected lineup. That's my bad. I forgot to post it. So that's let's read the correct one then, and I'll paste it incorrectly this time or incorrectly. But boom, projected, paste it here.
Oh yeah, it is not great. All right,
that's why. So that's why people reacted.
All right, yeah, this is a bad Yankees lineup. I hadn't looked at it yet. I just saw that our guy, the news guy, El Negro Loco, posted it in chat. I hadn't actually read it over yet because we're looking at the other ones. But yeah, this is not an ideal Yankees lineup. This is LeMahieu, Gardner, Voit, Odor, Torres, Sanchez, Mike Ford, Miguel Andujar, and then Tyler Wade in the 9 hole. Yeah, this is, as far as the lineups the Yankees could put out, this is about as weak as they could possibly do.
I mean, I still think the 2 through 6 aren't bad. Certainly, I mean, LeMahieu is somebody that I do tend to find a little bit less appealing to the field because he doesn't have a ton of power. The 314 batting average against right-hand pitching since 2019, like I get why people go there. But the bottom of the order, yeah, like you have Ford, Andujar, Wade. That looks ugly, but I still would say, I mean, I guess Gleiber too has been down enough over the last year with that ISO falling off a cliff that maybe you can't trust the longer term sample size of him against right-hand pitching, but still has historically had a 205 ISO. So I guess like, I think to me, like if you're sacking the Yankees, like I don't want a lot of the 7, 8, 9 or LeMahieu, but I don't think it's god awful. It's just like, you're just not getting a lot of those bottom of the order bats.
Yeah, I'm pretty curious to update the top stacks tool now and see where we have them getting to, because I actually think this lineup is weak enough that I'm going to have to redo all my lineups on Fanduel and Draftkings. Like, I was just expecting a fairly normal Yankees lineup. Like, I thought we'd have, Aaron Judge in there. I assumed, I wasn't sure if Gleyber Torres was going to play or not, but the big one is Aaron Judge being out. And then also I want to see, I think this makes Dane Dunning a pretty appealing pitching option.
Yeah, I mean, Dunning, the matchup gets a little bit easier overall for him in this spot. So I guess, let's see, has the ownership been updated? I don't think it has. I want to give you guys the most accurate little spin on money time again. Yeah, there we go. 14 seconds ago. So the ownership elves are working really hard for us in the morning. So we appreciate our guys behind the scenes doing that. So let's flip the hat and do money time now and talk about this updated ownership. Tyler's so on the ball as always when he's not Googling for Corey Kluber, no hitter bobbleheads, I suppose. We got top 5 on DraftKings and Fanduel, and hit that like button, guys. We appreciate it a bunch. DraftKings, the top projected 5 players or top projected 5 owned players. Tyler Mahle, number 1 at 54%. Number 2, now Domingo Herman at 48%. Number 3, Trey Turner at 46.5%. Number 4, Juan Soto at 37%. And number 5, Brandon Lau at 35.5%. Greg, now that Mahle is a little bit higher owned than Herman, do you just feel some sense of peace is washed across you?
It makes more sense to me for sure, because earlier I was looking at that and it just didn't sit well with me in terms of I didn't know why the field was going the way they were. But also now I think we look at the Yankees lineup. I think we have to expect that Domingo Herman's also a little bit less likely to pick up the win bonus than he was before. That's a little more significant on FanDuel than DraftKings, with the win being worth 6 points. But either way, yeah, it's definitely going to it's something that, and maybe a little bit of confirmation bias here because I was already liking Mahle a lot more than Domingo Herman, but just more reason for me to be a little bit lighter on Herman. I'm still underweight to the field on him.
Yeah, the Herman ownership holding up there. So he will be, it seems probably a popular pairing will be Tyler Mahle and Domingo Herman paired together. On FanDuel, Trey Turner, number 1 at 45%. Number 2, Chris Bryant at 44% rounded up. Number 3 at Juan Soto, 42%. Number 4, Austin Meadows at 40%. And number 5, Brandon Lau at 38%. And it's also worth pointing out too, Tampa Bay's guys not appearing a lot in the top 5 owned plays, but they are still not that far behind. And it does seem like they are still going to be a very highly owned stack. So keep that in mind. I'm actually going to paste in the updated top stacks as well. Washington's ownership came up a lot. They actually now project to be higher owned than Tampa Bay. We haven't gotten there yet, but that's a little surprising to me, I guess.
Yeah, so something that's also changed a lot, the Yankees top stack odds, and this is one I know because I was just entering some of my exposures on FanDuel, and now I started changing them. So the Yankees went from about a 13% chance to be the top stack on FanDuel all the way down to 8.7% after the lineup came out.
So it seems like the Awesemo data team, not big fans of what happened to the Yankees lineup here. So if you guys in the YouTube chat were disappointed to hear me read the incorrect Yankees lineup and then go, that's not that bad. It does seem like the Awesemo team here is very much supporting the idea that the Yankees lineup is much worse than usual. So they have dropped off a cliff. Let me just paste in these projections just to make sure I have everything right here. I guess if you're playing the Yankees, though, Greg, you mentioned they do look a little bit overowned according to the top stacks tool now. But out of these guys, as I mentioned, I still think the 2 through 6 looks pretty decent, going from Gardner, Voit, Odor, Torres, and Sanchez. Like, I don't mind that grouping against Dunning, but if you're playing Yankees bats, which ones would you want to prioritize?
Oh boy. I guess just based on price and where he's hitting in the order, it would probably be Gardner still as a value play. Odor always has at least home run power as a one-off, and he's, somewhat cheap. But, I mean, overall, this is not a team I'm dying to get to right now. Like, this is totally overhauled my exposures to everything now. So even a second ago, right, we were talking about the Cincinnati Reds and how they were way overowned on FanDuel. But now with the Yankees update, where the odds of the Yankees as a top stack has gone down so much, now we have the Reds just being appropriately owned. So they've gone from way over-owned to appropriately owned, and now that's something that becomes a bit of an issue in the build that I had 4.5 minutes ago.
So Greg will be modifying his things on the fly here, and he'll talk you guys through it as well with what he's changing, so you guys can hopefully get on the same page or decide if you want to go a different direction. But worth pointing out the Yankees' new ownership here. Luke Voit projected for under 5%. Gary Sanchez projected for 6%. I think the move to me would be to mini stack the Yankees more than full stack, because there's a lot of ownership going to DJ LeMahieu, a lot of ownership going to Rougned Odor, and then around 10 to 15% for Brett Gardner and for Gleyber Torres. I think to me taking Voit, Sanchez, and then one of Odor or Gardner has some appeal as a 3-man stack. So that's the move I would consider here. But there are some lower owned configurations you can get of the Yankees if you want to get there. If you are a believer in, I guess, at least the middle of the order, probably not so much the Mike Ford, Andujar, and Tyler Wade portion of things, which are all going to be under 4% owned on DraftKings. Dane Dunning, let's talk about a little more. Projection for him, not great. As a value pitcher, though, does seem like he'll be pretty decently owned. 30% ownership now expected for Dane Dunning's way. Of the year, though, 26% K rate, not looking that bad. The Yankees lineup, despite it being a little bit worse right now, it's only 3 guys to strike out above league average historically against right-hand pitching. 25% K rate for him on the year, but I do have this lineup for them today at a 22% aggregate K rate. So I don't mind Dunning here, Greg. I just feel like the strikeouts being there in a major way, not something I'm necessarily expecting, but I'm Dunning. I think if the price tag works and he sort of makes your stacks work with either, Mahle, I think in particular, I don't mind him, but I don't know that I view Dane Dunning as a necessity at 30% ownership.
All right, so I am updating my lineups right now, and I currently have the Yankees as the team I have the least amount of exposure to overall. So with that in mind, I feel like it just kind of makes sense from a game theory perspective that I do end up getting to some Dane Dunning here, because if I'm not going to be on the Yankees, and Dane Dunning's fairly cheap as an SP2 option on DraftKings FanDuel, less of a priority on only a one-pitcher site, but just thinking about the game theory of all that, if I'm not going to be on the Yankees very highly on DraftKings, I have them sub 10% in my lineups right now. And if on the other side, Dunning's cheap enough to where if I'm not on the Yankees, I have to figure that Dunning's going to pitch reasonably well. I think that's just going to naturally have to drive me to a little bit Dunning here.
Also, you got the Cubs lineup, and I don't know if I missed something here. I know he's not on my sheet for the names, but PJ Higgins is in the Cubs lineup, and I don't know who that is, and I've never heard that name out loud before.
Yeah, I don't know who that is either. Is he even? Let me check if he's even in the player pool on FanDuel or DraftKings. That seems like a potential negative.
He is on FanGraphs, so he's had 3 at-bats, it looks like, against a righty so far, and has not gotten a hit, and has struck out 2/3 of the time.
Guess I'll have to project him for 0 fantasy points.
He's never going to get a hit again. I think that's just how it goes. But the Cubs lineup, I know people in the chat already saw it, but Jock Peterson, Anthony Rizzo, Javier Baez, Ian Happ, David Bodie, Nico Horner, Nick Martini, PJ Higgins, and then Trevor Williams, the pitcher, in the 9-hole. So Nick Martini, actually not a bad hitter historically, which kind of surprises me.
Higgins not in the player pool on FanDuel. I'm checking DraftKings now. So, all right, don't have to worry about him on FanDuel. That's not going to force me to change any lineups, because what am I going to do? Roster somebody who's not playing? Let's see. And then also, but the Cubs are picking up a ton of ownership a second ago just because of the wind. Mm-hmm. So now I'm curious to see, after we just updated for the Yankees and the terrible lineup they threw out there, I'm kind of curious to see what this does to. By the way, Higgins, the flat min on DraftKings at 2,000. That's actually going to be appealing to me, just because. Anytime you can get a catcher for the min price, especially in a favorable hitting environment, it's really hard for me to avoid them, especially because more often than not, a lot of the catchers suck on small slates. And then you just kind of end up with, hey, who's the guy that sucks as much as everybody else, but is just cheaper, ends up being optimal. And that could be Higgins today.
Yeah, I think that's something. It might have been Josh who said it to me years ago doing one of the shows, or I think it was a salient point. If it's not Josh, I guess he gets the credit for it, which I'm sure Josh's ego, that he needs that more than anything right now. But he had said something in the absence of a good catcher, a stacked catcher is probably the best one. And I don't think he meant necessarily the titty size of the catcher. I think he meant more referring to the ability to get a catcher stacked up with the rest of the lineup. And I would say, Higgins being a part of a lineup is going to be very chalky. He will probably be one of the lesser owned parts, despite that minimum salary, because people just won't know to get there in time and won't know who he is. And he might be Jeff Mathis over the course of time. You don't know that, but a minimum salary, I think I agree. You could take that stab today. Let's keep working through the Dane Dunning part, I guess. Actually, well, I feel like we've covered it decently enough, but your exposure to Dane Dunning, is there an amount to you that seems appropriate? 30% feels lofty to me, but you might disagree.
So let's see. What did I have in my most recent run on Dane Dunning? And that's also something I'm going to have to change a little bit. It would help if I wasn't staring at a blank screen on my computer right now, because that's what my computer has decided to show me. I click on the tab and it's like, oh, this is what you wanted to see. Well, here's what we're going to show you. Let's see. Dane Dunning. I don't have him quite 30% actually. I felt I was getting to him at a decent clip, but 30% is pretty lofty. I still have more exposure to Mahle. I still have more exposure to Rich Hill. I did have more exposure to Domingo Herman, but I actually think I'm going to flip that. I'm going to push it so that I get more exposure to Dunning than Domingo Herman, just given what the Yankees lineup is.
Let's talk about Domingo Herman. He is facing a Texas team that has 3.9 implied runs against him. Roof is going to be closed in this game, so that is one that should benefit the pitching, I guess, as we sort of saw with Corey Kluber, though didn't quite work out that well for Jameson Taillon or for Garrett Cole with the roof closed, but that's neither here nor there. Domingo Herman, though, 24% carried for himself on the year. Still getting hit pretty hard in terms of home runs, a 4.6% home run rate, which is down slightly from his 5% rate since 2019. But overall, Herman has not been a bad pitcher on the year at that 1.5 1.15 whip, for himself, 241 batting average allowed. Like, I don't mind Hermann. Normally, he is facing a Texas team that on the year struck out 27% of the time against right-hand pitching. That ownership is still just a little too high. I guess I feel that about a lot of guys in the slate besides Tyler Mahle, though. So I may not be the person to ask about it, but Greg, Hermann now, what are going to be your final numbers for him with a matchup against Texas that I think the more you look at it, I could see why people are getting there. 6 guys that strike out above league average, 27% K rate on the year against right-hand pitching. Like, I get people might want to go Hermann's way at his price tag.
Yeah, I mean, for sure he's in my player pool, and he is my 4th most exposed starting pitcher right now. I just think he's going a little bit over-owned. So my starting pitchers right now, in terms of how I rank them in the priority I want to get to them, it's going to be Mahle 1, Rich Hill 2, Dane Dunning 3, and Domingo Herman 4 right now. And I mean, the Rangers offense for the year, they've still been okay. They have a WRC plus that's overall for the season fine against right-handed pitcher. They've been somewhere around a league average offense. They did get no hit yesterday, but I'm not going to weigh that too heavily. Corey Kluber, I mean, he's a tough pitcher to figure out because former aces generally sucked last year, then just delivers that great outing last night. But for the season, it's still an okay offense, and more so than anything, it's just the high ownership of Herman that has me looking a little bit elsewhere relative to what he's being rostered at.
It seems reasonable. And given the high ownership of Hermann, I don't hate the idea of going to Texas stacks a little bit more than the field will be. Looks like they have a 6.6% chance of being a top stack along with 4.7% ownership. And Hermann has been hit fairly hard, a 9.3% barrel ball rate this year. Launch angle for him is not the greatest, but 14.4 degree launch angle does seem like there could be some potential to get some hits here. So really the main thing for me is just that going against the high ownership of Hermann, I don't mind doing to some amount here with Texas. And you are going to get ownership going, and really Nate Lowe in particular is going to be the only one who's owned any meaningful amount over 10%, but Willie Calhoun, Nick Solak, Joey Gallo going to be a little bit owned. Adolis Garcia being completely unknown to me in the 5 hole. I don't know that that's a play that I would want there. He should be higher on the 2% to me. But the bottom of the order, Greg, I feel like I don't mind it from Texas. They're not like great hitters by any stretch with guys like David Dahl, Kiner Falefa, Charlie Culberson. Like, I don't really like those guys. Jonah Heim, I also really don't like. The young Jeff Mathis, I feel like you could call him based on his results for the most part, but Texas just stacking them in a couple of different ways. I think you should do it a little bit on the slate, just given that high ownership of Hermann and the fact that he has been hit pretty hard historically.
Yeah, and the one player that always makes sense to me the most is a one-off. Like, even if you say, like, hey, I think the Rangers offense sucks, maybe you stacked them last night against Corey Kluber and you just have this bad taste in your mouth that they literally had 0 hits against him. Joey Gallo is somebody who more often than not is going to not get hits when he walks up to the plate, but when he does, they're home runs. So as an individual one-off play, Joey Gallo, who, I mean, if we want to jump the gun a little bit and do some home run picks, I think Joey Gallo is a pretty solid home run option, especially when you look at some of the home run to fly ball rates we've seen from Domingo Herman during his career. Always been well above league average, 12 in 4 years in the big leagues, 12.5% home run to fly ball rate, 15.8%, 18.8%, and this year 14.9%. So when Herman struggles, he gives up home runs, and that all leads me to think that Joey Gallo, boom or bust play, not picking up a ton of ownership, and is one of the one-offs that I really like as a potential home run play.
I think for me, that's how I feel about Adolis Garcia at 3,500. Like, I think that feels like a low price tag. And, the thing for me is that I think it's a weird situation if people are not going to play Texas, that much because of them getting no hit yesterday. Like, I get it. But, again, you saw the same team hit Tyon pretty hard. Tyon's been getting strikeouts this year. You saw the same team hit Garrett Cole pretty hard. So, like, I wouldn't necessarily put in, and I know we've talked about a lot on the show recently that Alex mentioned that he doesn't find there to be a lot of correlation between the previous day's results and the ownership the next day. But I think if Texas is going to be any lower amount owned because of the fact they got no hit, and in a revenge game for Corey Kluber on his own bobblehead night, I do feel like that's something that, getting a little more ownership to Texas to me just seems like a move that I would want to get to. And Garcia in particular, I just don't get it. He's raked the ball pretty much all year long, 7.4% on run rate. Like, he should be getting owned a little bit more, I think, in this spot against Herman. Let's do some quick plugs here. Coming up in a couple hours, we do have the MLB Deeper Dive. That's going to be a show with Aton taking the lead on that one with Gunn, Dacker, and Terry. That's at 3 p.m. Eastern. They'll be talking about the main slate for you guys, going game by game on that one as well. So go check that out, 3 p.m. Eastern time, 12 p.m. Pacific time. And also make sure to check out the main slate ownership projections, because those are our free premium tool of the day. So no money time needed today for you guys out there for the main slate. You can just get those ownership projections for free. Early slate ones you have to pay for, but the main slate ones are going to be our free premium tool of the day. So check those out. And again, that promo code Gold Rush does end at the end of the day today. So make sure to use that 25% off your first month of Awesemo Plus with the Gold Rush promo code. That's Gold Rush, GOLDROU. Why did I put an O in there? RUSH. that's what happens when you try to spell out loud while also reading the thing for some reason, as if you don't have the confidence to spell an 8-letter combination of promo code there. But Gold Rush, GOLDRUSH, is the promo code at awesemo.com/join. So check that out. Last game on the slate, Washington, 4.9 implied runs going against Trevor Williams. Trevor Williams, a pitcher who people early in the year had some hopes for. It does seem like he has leveled out as a man who is not very good, giving up a 304 batting average on the year. K rate's been up for him to 23.4%, but I don't think that matters when you're giving up a batting average that would be Hall of Fame caliber, basically. 1.8 whip as well, given up by Trevor Williams. Another guy for me, I guess, on the slate that just doesn't look the most impressive. Maybe you get something out on an optimizer, Greg, but Trevor Williams is just a bad pitcher in a bad situation.
I understand wanting to spell out the promo code because, maybe somebody's put it in. They go, hey, I don't know what it is there. People could spell Golden Rush by themselves. Maybe not you, but most people, they could have just spelled Gold Rush out. And instead you tried to help them, made it simpler. Now people are questioning. They're like, what? Is that how gold is? Like, people are just totally confused now.
I think I was going Gold Rosh, which is our Rosh Hashanah promo code. Unfortunately, it was a little bit too premature on that. So that's my bad.
Yeah, it's all right. It all comes around. I don't know. Not to get too far off, but my mom will always call me or text me and be like, hey, what are you doing for the Jewish holidays? Like, I didn't even know it was the Jewish holidays. Because the other thing that's really confusing about them is it's on their own schedule. It's not like it's the same thing. It's not like an American holiday where it's like, hey, every December 25th is Christmas. It's just like some random time because it operates on a different calendar. Yeah, so that's always, my mom will try to guilt me into showing up for like Jewish holidays or whatever, and I never know where they are. So no, maybe you make a good point. It helps to spell it incorrectly for
that's
people.
that's the main thing I wanted to do, was just to help people feel better about themselves by I haven't had to spell anything out loud in a long time. And the last time that actually I have one traumatic childhood spelling incident where I was like in the gifted classes. I've always historically, despite what I may have just shown here, been a very good speller and decent vocabulary and all of that. We did a spelling bee when I was in, I think, 3rd or 4th grade, and it was like public school spelling bee, so the words were super easy to start, especially. And I got the word sneeze, and I just straight up choked, and I spelled it SNEZE. And to this day, it haunts me. Like, even thinking about it now, like I feel like a pain in my heart because I should have won that spelling bee. Like, I knew every word that came after that, but sneeze is the one that tripped me up.
Yeah, listen, it's another one of those tough words. I'm sure you spelled it SNOOZE.
Yeah, I mean, it was SNEZE. I left out one E. That's one of my issues. I think too fast, talk too fast, and then you end up leaving out an E or adding a random O into Gold Rush. That's just how it goes. But talk to me about Trevor Williams. Let's get back on track here. Let's focus on the hard news of Trevor Williams and his mediocre pitching. Are you willing to get to Trevor Williams at all today, given the fact he is going to be 5% owned?
No. So the key to this game is that, well, number one, we're going to have to hit on the Cubs lineup in a second. Not quite as bad as what the Yankees threw out in their potential lineup today, but no Wilson Contreras, no Chris Bryant for the Cubs. That's going to alter the outlook on their offense a little bit. But from the Williams standpoint, I think that he has the toughest matchup on the slate against the Washington Nationals. Also, we have the wind blowing out at Wrigley Field. That's going to present an issue. So also, Trevor Williams, not a guy who generates a lot of swing and misses. He's a pitch to contact pitcher. So you put him now in this kind of environment where he's facing a really tough offense. He's going to be pitching to contact. The wind is blowing out. The Nationals are my favorite team to stack on the slate now.
So the one thing that I think is going for Trevor Williams here is he does keep the ball down pretty well. And obviously that could be, throwing a curveball, no pun intended there, about when the wind is going a little crazier in Wrigley, but only a 28% fly ball rate for himself this year. The launch angle's been down to 8 degrees as well. So he is keeping it down for the most part. And that to me is the main reason I'm bringing this up, is not to play Trevor Williams. But I do think there could be some cause for concern when you do have Trey Turner on DraftKings projected to be 47% owned. Juan Soto projected to be 37% owned. Like, these guys can get hits today, but like, are they going to get it out of the park against a guy who's keeping the ball down and also a bullpen that only has a 2% run rate? I don't know that I have the confidence that the field's going to have with that ownership, Greg. And I think for me, this is still a spot that with Washington being higher owned than Tampa Bay, I might be more inclined to go Tampa Bay's way, just because I think there could be a little bit of fool's gold here for Washington, at least at this level of ownership.
Yeah, it's funny how things turn with ownership as the slate as the slate goes on and we get more information. But I'm still leaning pretty heavily towards the Nationals. I always tend in Wrigley Field games with the wind's blowing out. It's a spot that I really like to get to. And while, yeah, we do have the Nationals picking up a whole bunch of ownership, still the good hitters for the Rays are very, very popular. And obviously for the Nationals, we have a lot of ownership going to Juan Soto and a lot of ownership going to Trey Turner. But for the for the Rays, you don't get some kind of ownership discount if you're going to, Austin Meadows, or if you're going to the guys that are actually quality hitters in the lineup. What brings down the overall ownership of the lineup is just some of the guys towards the back end of the order who, while I do think you could make that stack to be contrarian, I think the Nationals as a whole are still slightly more favorable.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable one. Also, we got a question that I'll just answer out loud too. I answered in the chat, but Larry C asking, if the updated stacks after the Cubs lineup came out, they're coming up huge in the projected ownership still. So the top stack still updates from what I believe is going to be whenever the projections update. And let me make sure, because if we got Higgins in, then we will have, so they should be updated correctly now because Higgins is in the projection. So I think the top stacks must have been updated too.
Also just refresh the page to make sure that it's the most recent refresh, and the numbers might change for you.
Yeah, but just one helpful tip, I think, because I've learned a lot more with NBA playing more closely there and paying more attention to the boom bust tools, that the tools sort of work in a cycle. So when you see the projection update or the ownership update, usually the top stacks are updating at the same time as well, and top pitchers for the normal slates. Let me just see if there's any ownership changes for early. So really the main thing to me is that Washington just looks overowned. I get the spot and all that, but I guess, Greg, the question to ask you then would be, for Trey Turner, Juan Soto, these guys going to be 47% and 37% owned. Is there a cap number that you would give to people out there to try to guide them, to give them some sort of goalpost to hit for themselves? Because 50% Trey Turner, I know the wind blowing out is a thing, but that is an absolute, a lot of Trey Turner at his price tag.
Yeah, I have around 30% of each of them right now. So it's like, hey, these guys are in a big chunk of my lineup. It's not quite as much as the field. But overall, as a stack, I'm very heavily exposed to Washington now.
Also looks like Turner's ownership come up even more, because we got one more run of ownership here. And so Turner's ownership didn't come up, but he's now the number 2 owned guy. Domingo Herman came down a little bit, and Soto as well, I guess, came up too. So now the final numbers for the Nationals here, according to our ownership projections, which you can always get for yourself at awesemo.com/join. Turner 46%, Juan Soto 43%. So that is an ungodly amount. Greg, is there any way to get the ownership product down here? Are you willing to go to a Jordy Mercer, to and Andrew Stevens? I actually think Andrew Stevens looks kind of appealing at the bottom of the order, 2,200. And he's had some pretty good pop, getting on base at a 403 clip against right-hand pitching since 2019, 316 batting average. Like, there aren't a lot of 9-hole hitters who actually look like good. I would say some look good relative to their price tag, but Stevens, I think, actually looks kind of good.
Stevenson, I'm way overweight to the field on him, actually, based on the most recent ownership run we had. So yeah, I'll agree with that and say I think he's somebody worth being overweight too. Kyle Schwarber, to me, is another guy who I think warrants a little bit more ownership. And it's also, relative to the other guys in the lineup. But most of these guys are really, really popular. But Stevenson and Schwarber are the 2 individual hitters that I think have a little bit of upside and are also, for different reasons, strong plays. Number one, Stevenson, also really cheap on DraftKings. So combine that with the lower ownership. And he's the guy, actually, relative to what the field is at, I am the most overweight to.
You guys have about 10 minutes left to lock, though. I think we'll probably just jump off at the 30-minute mark, because I don't think we need to extend that far, barring anything weird happening here last minute. But let's talk about our last group of pitching and hitting here. Joe Ross going against the Cubs, 5.6 implied runs going against Joe Ross. Joe Ross, another guy who, for the most part, keeps the ball down a little bit, though not quite as well as Trevor Williams, a 37% fly ball rate for himself. Launch angle also 12.5 degrees instead of the 8.2 for Williams, so definitely giving a little more lift to things. And Ross, Greg, I know, was a guy earlier in the year you had some hope that he might have turned things in a positive fashion with his velocity looking better, but it does seem like he's stabilized to pretty much the exact same guy he was before the pandemic. 21% strikeout rate for himself, which is a little better than the 20% K rate that he had. He's actually been giving up more home runs. The xFIP is right there, 4.8 xFIP compared to 5 xFIP since 2019. So Ross, for the most part, I feel like getting maybe slightly better results, but for the most part, the exact same dude he's been since the last couple of years.
Yeah, so I thought that maybe the time off and the fact that he's dealt with so many injuries and he had the velocity look good early, that I thought that it could uptake. And by the way, it worked for me for one slate, which, hey, I don't, in hindsight, it was probably the wrong call, except I won a GPP that day. So, hey, I could be wrong on Joe Ross, but look at that. It worked out in the long run anyway. But yeah, I still have an interesting kind of stance for Joe Ross for this slate, particularly for Fanduel, though. I'm not getting to him as a pitcher. He's not in my player pool, but it's something that, going back to what Larry C had mentioned in the chat before, the Cubs are still picking up a ton of ownership on FanDuel. And it has come down a little bit with the news that Chris Bryant is not going to be in the lineup, no Wilson Contreras. But this is still a team who we currently have projected for 25% ownership on FanDuel. with an 18% chance of being the top stack on the slate. So with the wind blowing out, they're a team to get to, but we actually have Washington on FanDuel coming in under-owned, believe it or not, despite all the ownership going to those top guys because of some of the lack of ownership elsewhere. So the Nationals, we have project for 18% ownership on FanDuel, 19.7% odds of being a top stack. So at least from a FanDuel standpoint, no matter how bad Joe Ross has been this year, I don't think that the Cubs warrant all this ownership with some of their best hitters out.
Yeah, and I think that sort of just goes back to what I was saying that we mentioned earlier with the Washington side of the equation, where I do think Tampa Bay just looks a little more appealing now with that ownership coming down. They are still going to be a little bit higher owned than Chicago, but going to be less owned than Washington. And honestly, it wouldn't shock me if by the time the slate locks that Chicago just ends up being a little more higher owned than Tampa Bay is. So to me in this spot, I just think that Tampa Bay has gained an appeal. I think the Cubs look perfectly fine. There's a lot of ownership going to all of them though. And I think even Higgins now up to 25%, which is PJ Higgins, a guy we didn't know existed. Now he's going to be played by a quarter of the field. So that's the fun of MLB DFS. But I don't mind the Cubs, but I think getting to more than the field would just be a crazy move.
Yeah, that's why that's something else that's driven me to the Nationals a lot on this spot, and it is a little more so on FanDuel than DraftKings, but still, it's the team that I'm getting to the most overall on this slate. And the Cubs, I don't think the field is reacting enough to this weakened Cubs lineup.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And Nico Horner going to be lightly owned. It seems Nick Martini going to be lesser owned than PJ Higgins. So if you want to try to get that ownership grouping down, you can with those two guys a little bit more, but everybody else will be over 20% owned. Jock Peterson over 33% owned. So you're getting some very loftily owned Cubs today for a team that does have a high total, wind blowing out in Wrigley. So there are some reasons going there, but just with how baseball goes, maybe some reasons to get that ownership product down. Greg, you want to do home run picks here? You want to do a no-hitter pick for yourself? I feel like we might as well just throw one out here in the hopes. Like I feel like on a short slate, we have a good chance of getting it right if it does go down.
Yeah. I mean, like there's a no-hitter every day in baseball now. But if they were to count the Madison Bumgarner no-hitter as an official no-hitter, that we would have already tied the record for most no-hitters in the season.
That should not be the case. It doesn't feel like that should be how that goes at this point with where hitting has evolved to and all of that. I know the pitching is also making strides. Alex mentioned on the Deeper Dive yesterday that he was watching the Turnbull pitching game, his no-hitter 2 days ago. And he was mentioning that Turnbull just kept like grabbing the ball and going like this and just basically like making love to the ball with his hands, rolling it up like it was going to be a fine ravioli. And instead he was like, it has to be clearly some of the stuff going on the balls. And I don't know either, but it is odd that this is are they just not paying attention to the scuff ball? Because they were targeting Trevor Bauer for it. And now just everybody else, we're just letting everything slide.
So what happened was it wasn't that they individually targeted Trevor Bauer. They actually collected baseballs from every single pitcher in the league to examine them to see if anybody was using anything. What did they find? I don't know. I'm not even convinced they actually looked at it. I think it was more for theater than anything else. But I really think that we've just seen baseball's really been fudging with the balls recently to try to, I don't even know what it is they're trying to do, to be honest. They're doing something with the baseballs to try to manipulate the game. They're trying to make it higher scoring. Then they found out that, hey, maybe we went too far. And now we're just throwing out Nerf balls or whatever that people are just blasting out of stadiums. So they tried to, I know they changed the seams on the ball a little bit, which I thought maybe that would allow pitchers to get more rotation, but whatever it is, I don't know. There's something a little wonky going around with the baseballs somewhere that's impacting results. And that's definitely having some impact, but we would need somebody who's more of a physicist to be looking at some of the spin rates and stuff to really figure out what's going on.
I actually did read a science paper about humidity's effect on baseballs the other day because I don't know why I was just like checking out some launch angle stuff because of talking I mentioned Max Motrisky, one of the guys who does the Deeper Dive shows and mentions launch angle a lot. So I've read some Fangraphs paper about launch angle and then it was like, let me just read about humidity too. And it was something with like humidity drains the liquid out of the balls in a way, or that sounds like a bad phrase out of context, but it does. There's something with the liquid component in the ball that moves around with the humidity. And then I know too on the Theo Epstein interview with Bill Simmons a couple of weeks ago, and he's one of the guys behind the scenes for MLB trying to, I guess, make whatever improvements they do. And his big thing that he mentioned over and over again is that, I guess, according to studies that they found, were that people really like seeing triples. Like that's the most exciting play in baseball. Like, I guess that's what it's called, but also like fans genuinely believe that. So their whole focus is getting balls in play. And it's just crazy that like that's the focus. And yet somehow the result has been guys can't even touch the ball. And I don't know what that means. I would say my no-hitter pick, though, and it's going to be one that is a little bit recency biasy, but I will say it's Domingo Herman. I feel like he's missing bats pretty well, and I think if anybody is going to get it going, it's been these guys who just keep getting the swing strikes, getting the chase rate going, and Herman is the best one on the slate. So if anybody's going to throw a no-hitter today, it's going to be Domingo Herman.
Let's see. I'm just going to go to the guy who I'm most overweight to right now, which is Rich Hill. I think the concern here about him actually throwing a no-hitter is that he doesn't work all that deep into games usually, even when he's going well. So is he likely to pitch a no-hitter? No, except I don't really think that's the heart of the bid anyway. We're not going to talk about realistic outcomes. So Rich Hill, my no-hitter pick of the day.
Yeah, honestly, recently it's just been like pick the fifth shittiest pitcher on a slate and just hope that it works out. And so I guess that going with that logic maybe could be a little different. And give me your home run pick too before we close it out, because why not? We got 1 minute left.
Yeah, Joey Gallo. I had mentioned it before. I think that I'm going against your no-hitter pick. One of us is going to win out, or more likely, both of us are going to be wrong here. But yeah, I think Joey Gallo, one of the one-off hitters, more likely to homer today.
And I'm going to take Austin Meadows. I mentioned him earlier. I think he is chalky. He is a little bit less chalkier than he was earlier in the show, but still going to be 35% owned. And I think he is going to be frustrating for the people who play either Washington or the Cubs game and then end up missing out on an Austin Meadows. Just going yard immediately off of Dean Kramer is my pick. Greg, give the people the plugs here before we jump off.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at Ehrenberg DFS. I'm going to be doing live before lock for NBA, I believe, tonight with you. We're going to be talking about a one-game slate for an hour. So there's probably going to be some shenanigans and time to fill there.
Yeah, there is definitely going to be some shenanigans. There will also be shenanigans on the tip-off today, in which I'll be reunited with Ben Ross as well as our girl Kayla. That one is coming up at 5 p.m. Eastern. It's on a combined stream. It looks like it's actually two different combined. No, this is tomorrow's. Today it's a combined stream for Deeper Dive, Live Before Lock, and Live Before Lock. Tip-off is on its own stream. Tomorrow there are two different combined streams. Boy, it is going to be confusing around here. So the easiest thing to do for yourself is subscribe to the channel right now. Hit that like button before you go. And you got 4 minutes left to get your lineups in, so make sure to do that now. But follow at Ehrenberg DFS, follow at Chris Spags, follow at Awesemo_com, and shout out to our producer Tyler, keeping us in the loop on all the Corey Kluber bobblehead news that we needed to know. We appreciate you guys for being here. Enjoy your days and good luck.